since it's after 7, I'm going to toss it over to Andy and say, Andy, thank you again for joining us on this Friday evening. And thank you to everyone who has taken time out of their week to join in this opportunity to learn more. I think this is incredibly important work, and am so thankful that everyone is willing to be here.
Yeah, it is a gift to be with you all again, and looking forward to fun conversations like last time. So thank you for this opportunity. Same as last time, we invite respectful curiosity. It's encouraged. Please ask questions. There are no dumb questions. If there's some that might be offensive to folks in real life, we'll give a little explanation for why, and it's not a problem. And you're welcome to ask questions at any time. So like Pastor Charles shared, part of it will be recorded. So if you are comfortable having your question recorded, ask away anytime. If you'd like to wait till the cameras are not rolling, then wait till the end. Make space for ambiguity. Again, a lot of these terms are fluid and changing. No one can speak for a whole community. Each of us has our own experiences. And then what's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here, except for the fact that it's recorded. So those pieces that you want to stay here, save for the end. Thumbs up if we're good with that. All right. So would someone like to open us in a prayer? Anyone that's not a pastor want to open us in a prayer?
Catherine says, do you want to? And so, okay.
She was smiling. Okay.
Love it. I'm used to waiting out the silence.
Creator, thank you for this wonderful world you have created and all of the huge rainbow of people of every gender, every sexuality, every change there is. May we come to learn to understand and accept and celebrate each other. Amen.
Amen. For those of you who weren't here last week, my name's Andy. My pronouns are they, them. I am a United Methodist pastor in Northern Illinois. And on the side, I work part-time as a leader of a drop-in center for LGBTQ teens. So it's been fun. I shared last week, really the teens are the most up with the language as it constantly changes. So they should be giving this presentation. But I get to listen in sometimes and learn from them. So. All right. So I'm going to invite you to play along in the chat box with me. When you think about gender, what comes to mind? What are the things that we use to express gender? Clothing.
Pronouns.
Mm-hmm. Pink for girls, blue for boys, pronouns, outward presentation. Great, great. So when I talk about gender, what I mean is a social construct, meaning that we, the people, and the systems and institutions that we're part of create our notion of what gender is. Gender is not concrete, right? So in different cultures and communities, the ways that we express gender can be completely different. There's not one definitive way to express one gender. But in the United States, what are some of the ways we've constructed gender? I think pink for girls, blue for boys, right? That's one we typically see. Even from like as soon as you get out of the hospital, what colors you're showing up for. What other things do we use in the United States? Sports division. Mm-hmm. This is like an easy and difficult question, frankly, because so much of our culture is guided by gender, right? Last week, someone brought up etiquette, boys' toys, girls' toys, changing rooms, etiquette and our expectations for social behavior, the things that we like, bathrooms, clothing sections. Yeah. So it's amazing how many things we base on this idea. I'd say also in the United States, our understanding of gender is usually binary, right? We talk about men and women. And also we think about gender having to be the same as sex, right? We think all about chromosomes and genitalia. Often that's what happens. But This doesn't always work. So we'll play a game of true or false. True or false. Everyone's biological sex fits into the category of male or female. We've got some falses. False, false, false. All right. Great. You are ahead of the game of some people. So you're totally aware of this. Some people are born intersex, born with chromosomes, genitalia, or internal organs that are not solely male or female and may or not be noticed early. This is the intersex flag. So we've got different flags for all of the groups within the LGBTQIA community. And so this is fairly common, like as common as folks being born with red hair, but there's a lot of stigma around it for many years. When people were born intersex, if they could tell when it was a baby, they would kind of scare the parents into saying, like, you need to make a decision now to have surgery for your child. And often that surgery for a child's genitalia was based solely off of how large it was. And, you know, if it was over this size, okay, this child's going to be a boy. If it was under, it will be a girl, simply because that was how it was done. But there's been a lot of pushback about that, and more hospitals are now giving better education about what this means and saying that if your child doesn't have issues with, you know, if this won't impact using the bathroom or things like that, like, you can hold off. But it's not always that simple. So sometimes people know when a person's a baby that they're intersex. Other times you might not find out until later in life. These are some different intersex variations. So you can see that this shows up in many different ways. In a book study that I read, they talked about with creation, right? We talk about night and day, and we talk about land and sea, but we also know there's marshes. There's a whole lot of in between. And I think we see that with sex and gender too. So along with that, I said you might not know right away that someone is intersex at birth. Sometimes people don't find out until later in life. It could be puberty looks different than they were expecting, or it could even be as late as when a person, if they're trying to get pregnant, and they might find some obstacles there. So again, the intersex experience is vast and varying and can be different for a lot of people. So along with what we said about gender, so we know now, right? Sex is varied beyond male and female, so gender probably is too. Gender is self-identified. So while we love throwing those gender reveal parties and setting forests on fire, at the end of the day, each of us identifies our gender. So we can perceive other people's gender, right? We might assume and judge them based on their hair or their voice or the clothes they wear. And what we've been taught about gender, but at the end of the day, each person determines their gender. Some people's gender matches the gender that was assigned to them at birth, and so they would be cisgender. So if Susie was born in the hospital and the doctor says it's a girl, and Susie grows up and identifies as a woman her whole life, Susie is cisgender. Are we, do we get that? Simple enough? All right. For people whose gender does not match what they were assigned at birth, they may be transgender. And there's a variety in that. So you could be a transgender man or a transgender woman. When we use those terms, the person is the gender that they put after the word transgender. So if someone says, I'm a transgender woman, that means that they're a woman or she's a woman. If they're a transgender man, they're a man. And just like there is variation in how cisgender people express their gender, there is variation in how transgender people can be transgender. These are some of the transgender identities from around the world. So sometimes folks think that this gender stuff is a Western idea, that we have just made it up. But throughout history, folks have been understanding of gender beyond the binary of man and woman in different places and throughout times. So I just thought that was interesting. We won't go over these, but I wanted to just give an idea of how beautiful and complex gender can be. So here's another little language piece that people will use at times, amab and afab. Amab means assigned male at birth, and afab means assigned female at birth. So you could be amab and cisgender. If you're amab and cisgender, what gender are you currently?
Male.
Nailed it. Yep, got it. And so then what about afab? If you're afab and transgender, what genders could you be? If you're AFAB and you're transgender, you might be a trans man, you might be non-binary or agender, and we'll learn some of those words in a second. So hold tight if you are not sure what I just said. So agender. Agender is not having a gender, a person who completely identifies outside of the concept of gender. With some of the words we're going to use, agender, non-binary, gender queer, the point of them is basically not male or female, not fitting into that idea. People express it differently and understand themselves differently. These words matter, but I think that being the crucial part is that this person is not a man or a woman. Gender fluid. So a person who's gender fluid does not have a fixed gender identity. They might identify with a different gender at different points. Some of the youth that I work with are gender fluid. And so we do name tags that have names and pronouns. Some of them have different name tags that they'll wear on different days. So we know to call them the pronoun that feels right for that day. Non-binary. Non-binary means outside of a gender binary. So maybe neither male nor female, both female and male, or somewhere on that spectrum that doesn't fit quite well into one or the other. And a slang term for this is NB. So we've already done this, some of the ways that people express gender. We'll skip that and go on to this. One of the things that you already mentioned is pronouns, right? Names and pronouns. So with pronouns, who has pronouns? Everyone. Yes. And some people don't use any pronouns, but yes, I say this because it's been interesting on TikTok. There are people who will ask content creators, like, what are your pronouns? And some of them are saying, I don't have any, right? Well, I think most people have pronouns or, intentionally don't have pronouns. So we use pronouns. Most people use pronouns because we don't want to use someone's name over and over again. It's a short word that helps us know who we're talking about. Pronouns are often gendered and therefore can be a way that we express gender. So often, but not always, feminine pronouns could be she, her, and hers. Often, but not always, he, him, his are masculine pronouns. And that's not it, though. While we live in a culture that likes binaries, this or that, boy or girl, more and more people are recognizing that binary doesn't work for everyone. So some non-binary people or agender people and some gender fluid people at times, and also genderqueer people, might use other pronouns. Often for those pronouns, ones that are fairly common are they, them, their. So I use they, them, their pronouns, and some other people do too. So this is just like a basic, how do we conjugate our verbs list. So I would say, right, there are a ton of pronouns, and we'll talk a little bit about neopronouns soon. If you feel like your brain is holding so much stuff and you don't have the capacity to hold it all, if you can practice using they, them, their pronouns along with she and he, that will be really, really good. So you can see some different ways to say it. So they love cats. Please pass the phone to them. Their bicycle is yellow. They did their homework themselves. Something I think that's important to mention. So my staff parish relations committee, bless them, the first time they did my staff review with they, them, their pronouns, they had a bit of a struggle, right? So I got to help them reword my review because they wrote, they are this, they is. It was they is a good pastor, right? Because it's the singular they. So they thought, conjugate to the singular, but no. So even though you're talking about one person with they, them, their pronouns, you still conjugate like you would they when it's used for plural. So they isn't a good pastor, but they are a good pastor, but fun stuff to kind of work through and learn. So with pronouns, some people use one pronoun only, right? Maybe use he, him, his, or she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs, or ze, them, zers. Other people might not use any pronouns. In that case, you would just say their name. And that can feel tricky, right? That takes a lot of thinking because you're repeating a name a lot. Other people use multiple pronouns. So maybe someone uses both she and they as pronouns, in which case you would try to use both. Or the pronoun might change on the day if they're gender fluid. Any questions about this? It can get a little complicated.
Do you want to talk, can you talk about what to do if you mess up on the pronoun?
Yes. If you mess up on pronouns and you catch yourself right away, correct yourself. Say, oops, sorry about that. Then use the correct pronouns and move on. Move on. Sometimes when we make mistakes, we feel really bad and we make a scene about it, right? Oh no, I'm so sorry. I'm the worst. I'm terrible. Well, now you're forcing the person who you use the wrong pronouns for to comfort you. So my thing would be like, oops, sorry about that. Correct your pronouns and move on. And maybe a question even before that is, what do you do if you don't know somebody's pronouns? Right? So especially in a world that we're taught gender in certain ways, it's easy to assume, but you could always share your name and your pronouns, which is inviting for them to. In places like Zoom, you could add your pronouns to your name, which again could invite other people to do the same. You could put it in your email list, things like that. So when you share your pronouns, you give other people the space to do the same. So along with she, he, and they, there are neo pronouns, neo meaning new. And these are additional pronouns that are used kind of outside of those three to speak outside of the binary. So Faye is one that I hear sometimes in our centers. Z, Zim, Zir, I've heard a few times. The newest one that I've heard is Lynx. That one is new to me, and I need to do some work on learning that. But you can see that there are all sorts of pronouns and that some of these have existed for quite some time. Again, this can be overwhelming, right? And if you can learn she, he, and they well, right? And then try to pick up the neo pronouns if you have people in your life that use them, that's plenty good. What helps too is to practice. So I live with my grandmama. And when I change my pronouns, she's been really great about it, but I'll hear her on the phone practicing with my aunt. And the two of them hold each other accountable and correct each other. So that's a great way to practice, is using them.
Andy, could you perhaps just for sake of learning, give us an example of how one of these new pronouns would be used? Z and Z is obviously the one that comes up the most, and that comes from the German root of the sort of they, them. But can you give an sort of the same sort of examples you gave us with he, him, and them?
Yeah, so with Z, Zim, Zir, right? I'm going to make up the name Ollie. We've got a lot of Ollies in my drop-in center. That's kind of a popular name right now. And so if Ollie uses Z, Zim, Zir, and someone wanted to know where Ollie went, oh, Z went to the bathroom. Yeah, Zir house is next to mine. So again, it takes practice and it can feel really awkward. But the more we do it, the better it gets. How many of you took another language in high school? or in middle school? Did you have to do like the conjugation boxes? Yeah, right. This kind of feels like conjugation boxes a little bit. So if you can put that into your mindset and practice, that helps. I will email you a glossary that I've used in previous presentations. It also has a link to a website where you can just practice pronouns. It'll give you like the pronoun they want you to use and then do fill in the blanks with it. So I can send that to you if you'd like. It's kind of a fun resource. So just like you learn Spanish or French or another language, you can learn neopronouns. Another word when we talk about gender transitioning, the process or journey of living into one's gender identity. So transitioning does not look the same for everyone. Transitioning can be a lot of things. It can be social, it can be medical, it can be legal, and it could be some of these, it could be none of these, it could be all of these. Some ways that transgender people transition socially could be a name change. So when I transitioned, I changed my name. Clothing can be a piece of it, right? Often clothing's one way we express gender. It could be a fun haircut. I've got a friend whose child came out and really came out by asking for a haircut, right? This was a really young child and didn't have a word for non-binary, but wanted a haircut like some of the boys in the class, but also knew they weren't a boy. And so that was kind of how they started processing that. Pronouns, using certain pronouns is a way that a person could transition. The groups one participates in, it could be use of makeup or not. It could be what you do with your body hair. So there are all sorts of ways that people might transition socially. We talked about pronouns already. Medically, so some people will take T or E. T stands for testosterone and E stands for estrogen. For minors, you don't just start taking testosterone or estrogen. First off, there is almost always required that a person works with a psychologist. And so the psychologist is kind of paying attention through the process. And for minors, parental consent is required. But what would happen there would be around the time of puberty, a trans child might take blockers. And hormone blockers just kind of keep that puberty from happening. So it doesn't, and you can revert. So if you were to take blockers and you were to stop blockers, puberty as it would have happened would still happen. So that's not something that doesn't, potentially change. But then when a person's a little bit older and maybe their body's matured, they might explore taking testosterone or estrogen. And some people take shots. Also, there's gels. There are a variety of ways that people take it. And with both of those, some of the changes are permanent and others are not. So some people who take these might take them their whole lives, and other people might only take them for a little bit. Any questions about testosterone or estrogen or blockers? All right. Another piece is gender affirming surgeries. So gender affirming surgeries could look like top surgery, either reducing or enlarging the chest. It could look like bottom surgery and addressing genitalia below. It could be, there's a facial feminization surgery. There is, what is this one? This one is not solely about gender. I can't remember the hysterectomy, right? A person may have a hysterectomy as a gender affirming surgery. Obviously, other people have hysterectomy for regions outside of gender, but those are some of the ways that some people medically transition. And
sorry
the other,
to jump. Oh, sorry to jump in again, Andy. I think that one of the things that is sort of top of mind and present for a lot of us is what's happening in Texas and elsewhere. And can you kind of talk to us a little bit about, because this is the space that these bills really are leaning into, right? Mm-hmm. And so can you better illuminate for some of us who maybe this is the first time talking about T or E or blockers, exactly what that looks like for a state like Texas who is actively going after parents who are working with their youth in these spaces?
Yes. So Texas, the governor put out a statement saying that basically gender affirming care for minors is child abuse. And that parents and guardians of trans children who were allowing or encouraging such care to be provided to their kids should have their children removed from them. And so that happened, and it wasn't a law necessarily at first, but again, it creates that stigma. It makes it one harder for providers to offer care to transgender people. So that makes it incredibly hard for doctors and nurses and caregivers. It puts parents at risk, and for children or youth who may have been needing these supports, it puts them at a higher risk of suicide. Just, that's what it is, that these things can be lifesavers for some of our youth. A word I did not throw in here was gender dysphoria, and that's where a person feels incredibly uncomfortable in their body, right? And often that will be a reason why someone might need blockers or estrogen or testosterone. So you can imagine that if you have that care taken away from you, that can be an incredibly damaging thing. So that's some of what we're seeing in Texas. Currently, there's a block to keep them from taking children from their parents for this, but I'm sure Texas will fight that tooth and nail. Idaho also currently has a really scary bill in place where they are making it not only punishable for this care to be offered in Idaho, but it's punishable if you leave the state to seek care. So you can't even escape it. So we're seeing a lot of these things coming up in different places, and it is pretty scary. And I want to be clear too, I know that these things, right, hormones and surgeries can sound really big and scary and like, oh, what do youth and children, should they really be doing these things? You can't just walk into a healthcare place one day and say, I'm going to have surgery like this. They require usually a year of working with a certified gender therapist, a letter from that therapist and from your physical doctor saying that you are healthy enough to have that thing, and things like that. So again, it's not like a person can just like think, I'm going to try this for fun. There's a lot of thought that goes into this beforehand. It's already hard enough to have access to these things. So for these laws, that makes it even more difficult. And there's also legal changes. So that's, changing your driver's license, the name, and some states allow you to change the gender marker. Passports, which you can imagine how incredibly important that is. For folks who are traveling, especially by airplane, it can be incredibly difficult to be transgender because those high-tech fancy machines that you walk in detect your body parts. And if your gender doesn't match on, your passport, there are incredibly uncomfortable questions that might come up. And name changes. You can legally change your name, though not everyone does. These legal pieces can be a pain in the butt, right? Bureaucracy is hard work. And for those of you who've changed your last name, it may or may not have been an easy process. So you can imagine that this may or may not be an easy process. There are also rules. So some states, Illinois is one, where if you have a felony, you may not change your name for 10 years afterwards. Which they say is so that you can't get away with the crime, except your new name is still tied to Social Security. So I think that's kind of a silly law when they can find you with Social Security, even if you change your name. But, these are the things that we have in place. Transition troubles. So not everyone transitions. Some people don't want to, right? Or maybe they only want to transition in one way. Also, there is significant amounts of racial and economic discrimination in legal and medical settings. So if you don't feel safe going to the court to get your name changed, you might not go. If you don't have access to finances or healthcare, gender affirming surgery is going to be incredibly difficult to get access to. These things are still incredibly expensive. And even if you do have insurance, you have to basically prove that you're trans enough and that your gender dysphoria is bad enough to get approved to have access. So finances and healthcare are major issues. Also, pre-existing conditions. If you have other health concerns or struggle with certain types of mental illness, unfortunately, some therapists and or doctors might decide that you can't have these things. There's more and more conversation there, though, about a kind of consent-based therapy for this, right? So I don't know if that's the right word, but basically there's kind of a push now for therapists to do less gatekeeping and to just journey with people and to believe that they know who they are. But that's still iffy. Safety can be another one. Transitioning can be unsafe. A lot of people love to talk about, well, what if people, decide that they're not transgender anymore? What if they detransition? We love to talk about detransitioning. But in studies done, what they found is that most people who have detransitioned, it's not because they're not that gender. It's because the world wasn't safe enough for them. Just because you transition doesn't mean that the world will see you as you see yourself. And that has risks and dangers as well. And other times, lack of supportive resources in the community. If you don't have someone nearby who can provide gender therapy, or if you don't have access to, if you're a trans woman and you wear a size 15 shoe, it might be a little bit hard to find clothing, or things like that. So there are all sorts of reasons why people do transition in certain ways and all sorts of reasons why people don't.
Andy, while we're talking on the troubles of transitioning, can I ask, and I recognize I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, so feel free to say, hey, this is not a field of expertise for me, but a lot of, in the context of the church, we have a storied and very troubling history of therapies meant to help people who are struggling with either gender or a homosexual identity. And what might you add to the conversation around that? Because I think in the context of us being people of faith, that's important for us to claim and know and understand how that is practiced even today. Conversion therapy is still happening.
Yeah, so conversion therapy is happening today, and it's illegal in many states. And I would like to say there is a reason it is illegal, that conversion therapy can do irreparable harm to people. To learn that you aren't who you are, right? Or that you are not, like, who you are is not created in God's image. I mean, is there anything more damaging than those kinds of words and actions? And sometimes it just looks like talk therapy, where you're told over and over again and you're forced to that, or other times it's included physical harm, basically to get you to accept that you are not who you say you are. So that's a big no-no. And unfortunately, faith communities often are the providers of conversion therapy. And I hate to say it, but United Methodist, that was a conversation when I was at General Conference in 2016. There were some folks there who wanted us to say that conversion therapy was good. Fortunately, that did not get added into our book of discipline. We have our own issues, but that did not become one of them. So, and yes, thank you, Seth, for sharing. For folks who are looking for a name change, where you can go to do that. That is awesome. We've got the Transformative Legal Justice Project in Illinois, and it's good to see what different communities have in their areas to help with the process. So now we can do a time of question and answer if we want to turn off the record.